It's Wednesday, October 21st, 2015, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today we're joined by one of our mentors, Dan Mason, Head of Product at People Magazine, and he's going to lead a talk for senior product managers looking at their next career steps. So let me just briefly explain the format here today. The people you see in the room are mentors and mentees in the program. It looks like today, mostly mentors joining us. And so we're currently in session 3 of the Product Mentor program, where we pair up one mentor and one mentee with each other for a period of 6 months to help improve product management skills and make better products, basically. And so these are some of the mentors in that program. Today we're going to be hearing from Dan, one of our really outstanding mentors. And also you're going to be able to ask questions. So if you're joining us, go to theproductmentor.com/live. There you'll be able to see the live video and also ask your questions. And as they come in, we'll be jumping in and passing them along to Dan, and we'll be answering your questions in real time. So I'm going to just quickly go around the room, just see who's joining us today. I'm going to be going to everyone who is not frozen at the moment, and introduce yourself, what do you do, and also just say whether or not you're a mentor or a mentee. Let me go to Paul first.
Hi everyone, Paul Hurwitz. I am Director of Active Analytics at a company called Active Health Management. We are in the wellness and well-being and population health space, making people healthier where they work and in their life, and I am a mentor in the program.
Excellent. And Dustin?
Dustin Levy, I'm the Director of Product Management with Gentex Corporation. We're a military supplier, and I'm actually in a hotel room sitting right outside the Naval Air Station right now, and I'm a mentor in the program.
Awesome. And we'll go to Dan for a quick intro.
Hi, I'm Dan Mason. I am a mentor in the program working with Jay Fox, who is actually a product manager at The Deal. And at the moment, actually, I'm at Shutterstock. So this actually has changed since the beginning of the program, which explains how Jeremy introduced me from People, because that's where I was, and I've been in media and entertainment for most of my career in sort of different capacities. And at Shutterstock, I'm building a new editorial business, which is really exciting. So I'm excited to talk to all you guys and also hear your feedback.
Awesome. I guess we're always staying fluid here, and so again, keep your throughout the talk, post your questions to the productmentor.com/live. I'm keeping an eye on it on one of my several monitors that I've got in front of me here, and as the questions come in, I'll pass them along to Dan. And about myself, I am Jeremy Horn, aka the Product Guy, and I'm going to be moderating here today. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Dan over at Shutterstock. To lead today's talk.
All right, thanks a lot, Jeremy, and thank you guys for joining. The theme I've chosen here is one that I think should resonate with a lot of you guys who've been around a while, but it's really, in general, a conversation about career path, which is really challenging, I think, for those of us in product, because it's both a relatively new discipline, and it's one which has aspects of every other discipline. You know, we all know that we're jacks of all trades by design, and it's something that can be a challenge both to explain internally as well as then to really understand on your own what your options are and what the right way to chart a course really is. So I'm going to throw out some thoughts here and tell you a little about my background and sort of the things that I've come across. And I would love a productive discussion and just any thoughts from you guys as we go. So let me share my screen and we'll get going. Okay. Jeremy, do I need to present myself, or am I presented?
You're all good.
Awesome. Okay, so the title here was intended to be a little clickbaity. So you're a senior product manager. Now what? The answer may surprise you. But really, again, I think what really happens to product people is that you get to a certain point, and then you kind of say, well, I'm a product guy now. Now what? What happens now? It's not like you start at the junior marketing analyst level and you wonder what's next. Well, then there's senior marketing analyst, and then eventually there's the CMO. That's the path, and it's not something that you need a PhD to figure out. But for product folks, it can be a little different. So let me start with a little bit about me. So I've chosen the metaphor here of changing lanes. I started as an engineer. So I was a mobile guy back when men were men and the iPhone didn't exist. So, very early flip phones and Palm Trio and Windows mobile phones and all this stuff. Really, really fun, interesting jobs, Wild West, no tools, everybody was just hacking in their assembler. Really, really fun. But, I got to the point with that job and, in general with that role where I felt like I wanted more exposure to the business. I wanted more input on what we built and how we built it for a customer as opposed to how we built it technically. So the next thing that I tried was really changing lanes into product. I still wanted to build new stuff. I still wanted, to have the same sort of level of understanding of how things worked, but I really wanted to be focused on how the product was packaged. I wanted to be focused on customers. For me, it was also a switch from startups into bigger companies. So I've been a startup guy for probably 7 or 8 years, and then I switched over to product when I was at ESPN. And so it was a really, really exciting place to learn how to be a product guy because it's a wonderful brand. There's resources coming out their ears. Their job, 100%, is to delight their customers, their fans. It really was a place where you could work with customers directly, figure out what they wanted, understand their needs, and give it back to them in the form of a fully realized thing. So a really, really exciting place to be. What happened to me is that as I was a product guy, I felt like I was missing something. I felt like I wasn't as close to the engineering side as I always had been previously. And so I changed lanes again, and I actually went back into engineering management, which felt like a place where I could be helpful, in sort of both capacities. I could be an engineer, I could help engineers understand how to do their work, and I could help my product counterparts really figure out how to structure essentially and to package all the things that we built. So I tried that, and to be honest, I missed product, so I changed lanes again. I'm fortunate in that I was able to do this, and this is something I'll talk about a little bit more in the future, or in the rest of this talk, is just that it is possible to come in and out of the product discipline because it does touch so many others. And I went back into product, again, with a focus on building new things, and one of the things that I was tasked with was taking an existing company who had a great line of business and coming up with the next big thing, which was a fantastic challenge. And what ended up happening is that we built some products on our own, we built some products as partnerships, we ended up doing some pure prototypes we put in front of customers, and of all of those things, the partnership bore fruit. And the partnership actually then turned into an acquisition, which led me way over on the other side of the road to corporate development. So this was a really interesting thing for me because I'd always been fascinated by how investment worked, and I'd been fascinated by how essentially companies have to think about themselves as units in the world of other companies and understand how they can fit together and understand how to take raw materials and make something more. But one thing you'll notice is that corp dev is very much on the wrong side of the road. It was something that for me was a big departure. And I was excited to learn how to do it, and I thought it was something that I was pretty good at the strategic angle of it, but I was not going to be an investor long term. That wasn't really for me. I wanted to be too involved in the products and in how things were built. And so I changed lanes one more time, and I'm back in the product world, and that's really where I've been for probably the last 3 or 4 years. So, my journey has been, pretty circuitous. I think, if we took a poll and averaged out the number of jobs that people have had, inside this product mentor and product mentee group, I'm probably on the upper end of the scale. So, I count 11 here, maybe more, and I might have forgotten somebody. But part of that is that, I've worked in new stuff and new things. You burn really hard and you see what you can do, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it's a really exciting thing, but and it's also given me the flexibility, I think, to try a lot of different sides of how product management in general, how running a product and running a business work. And I've seen small companies. The smallest company I've been at was 15 people. I've seen big ones. I was at Disney. That's 100,000. I've been at startups. Well, actually, I shouldn't say the smallest was 15. I did a startup with my buddy on hardware, which was 3 of us. So, I understand what happens in those really, really tiny environments, and then the ways that, big companies try to weave themselves together for, in similarly effective ways. So, I hope that I can lend some perspective to, frankly, the young me. I mean, I wish that I'd known as much as I do now back, when I was getting into product, because, I think it's something where you largely are left to fend for yourself. Product folks tend to be very, agile thinkers, very, very much people who know a little bit about a lot of different stuff, and, as such, everybody finds value in them. But it's not the same kind of value that you find in a really great junior marketing analyst who, then is going to be groomed to be the next CMO. We don't always have that luxury. But I think that, there are things we can do to help ourselves along the way, and there are things that, we also just need to be aware of that are potential pitfalls. So let me see if I can fast forward here. Okay, so I saw this slide actually a couple of talks ago. I think it might have been Ian who was showing it. I apologize if that name's wrong, but I think it's a really interesting visualization of how everybody thinks this either is supposed to work or could work. As you come up as a product manager, you start on the business side. You're understanding what people need. Maybe it's that you come out of the tech side where you've just been the Scrum Master. Then you progress because you have agility that takes you beyond that pure business analysis role. And then you just kind of keep on adding responsibilities. I don't think this is how it works at all in practice. It's a framework that I think really makes sense, but that's in some sense part of why it kind of doesn't actually happen that way, because this implies that product is a discipline that every company really understands, and that they're planning for it, and that they're helping to groom product talent. And I think in practice, what you really see is something more like this. You have business analysts and you have people at lower levels of product management, and I think you get to this level, which I've chosen senior PM because it stuck out for me. But you get to a certain level where the company just doesn't know what to do with you anymore. And certain companies build the right kind of product apparatus, and then there is a path. But most people have to figure out how to get across this divide. How do I go from being an individual contributor who's good at my product to being someone who runs a team, to being someone who's in the conversations at the senior levels, around what the business strategy should be? It's not easy, and it's not straightforward. And if you are in a place where it's easy and straightforward, I suggest you stay there, because it's a better place to be than where most of us are. And the interesting thing here, and the reason why I chose senior PM also, is that throughout my career, I feel like I get recruited for 10 of these jobs a week. Senior product manager, right? They're coming from everywhere, right? Everybody wants a senior product manager. Comparatively, many fewer people want directors of product, or VPs of product, or chief product officers, or heads of product. I get solicited for those jobs now because I've been those things, right? And so I know roughly what it takes to run teams and to deal with those senior level stakeholders. But you have this massively outsized demand for people at the lower levels of product management, because it's a function that people know they should need, but they don't really understand how to tie it in. And this, for all of us, it just presents this conundrum. What do we do with the fact that there's so many places to go, but so few places that seem like they're actually steps up, right? And feel like they're actually real advancements in what the product management job can be. And so, I think for a lot of us, this sort of, it rings true. And I can't speak for everybody here, but, we've seen this. Most of us have found a way. We've parachuted, down into the other side of that chasm, and, we have some really good situations, especially on the mentor side.
So we had a question. We had a question that just came in.
Sure.
I don't know who from. They seem to have remained anonymous, but I'll ask their question anyway. And the question is, what questions do you have to ask organizations to ensure they understand the true form of the product role?
That's an excellent question, and I actually am about to get there. Is it okay to defer that until 2 slides from now?
Sounds good to me.
All right, fair enough.
So yeah, for everyone else, just keep the questions coming in at theproductmentor.com/live, and I'll keep passing them along to Dan. Back to you, Dan.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what I think that this really means, these observations, is that product roles and those of us in them are simply, they have a hard time growing within organizations, right? And there's a bunch of reasons for this. One is just the pure sort of nature of things, where a product manager can be a very senior person and have no direct reports, because their seniority is really about their knowledge, their agility, their cross-functional abilities, and they have a lot of indirect power, but they don't accumulate direct reports in organizations the way that other folks do. That is the traditional way that people advance in organizations, and it's something that as product people we're naturally not able to do at probably the same rate. I'll get into sort of how my experience worked with this and some of the things that I did to overcome it, but it is a real challenge. Again, unclear career path. It's just and we'll talk about this as well, if you don't see someone 4 levels above you who you think you could be and whose function fits with your function, it's easy to get confused. And especially with product folks, and I've seen this actually in particular on the media side, product is never a top-level function. It's never something that roots at the C-level. It's something that either reports into editorial or it reports into the business side, the GM or the finance guys. There's a bunch of places where product is a useful function, but it rarely actually goes up to the top in its same form. At some point you would be faced with a choice of, well, do I have to change jobs to go any higher than I am? And this is the same point. Every reporting structure is different, so it's not like you can know, at any given even type of company, how product is going to be perceived and how it reports and how it's going to be leveraged within the company. The other thing that's really tough about growth is that it's very easy to make a lateral move, and that speaks back to the senior product manager and the volume of these jobs. We all like solving problems. We all like having exciting things to do. We all like learning new things. You have to put some of that aside at most companies to go up the chain, right? You have to be willing to really devote yourself and commit to something that you're going to learn, so well that you'll be dreaming about it. And that's not really something I think that comes naturally to a lot of us in product. So the fact that it's easy to make lateral moves means that it's harder to grow within an organization. You're more likely to leave than you are to stay, unless the organization is really good at moving you around laterally. And this is the other one, and this is where my experience, I think I can tie it back. There are a lot of things outside product that seem really interesting. I think for most of us, we come back. We think about product as the place where we can scratch the most number of our itches. But it's easy to change lanes. It's easy to try something new. And they're all things that, depending on the particular skills that you use as a product guy, they're all things that can make a lot of sense and may even be better long-term fits than product, especially in a company you love who doesn't have the same either respect or need for product that you think they do. Okay, that all makes sense.
Jump in. We've got another question. This one is from Paul. Let me hand it over to you, Paul, to ask your question.
Sure. You mentioned in one of your points in your last slide was that usually product doesn't get the respect at the C level, and sort of piggybacking on the other person's earlier question of what are the companies that really get product management. Do you think that a company having a chief product officer kind of position is an indicator of companies that get it when it comes to product?
It's certainly an indicator, and it's definitely one of those things where I think it's not just about that title, because one thing that you'll see about CPOs in particular, I think, is that they're new, right? It's not like this is a function that's existed for years. It's something that people, as product has become more accepted, they've ratcheted it up the ladder. Like it used to be a VP product, and then it was an SVP product, and now it's a CPO. The company may or may not have really accepted what that implies, and the level of oversight that product really needs to be effective. But in a lot of cases they have, and it's certainly a strong indicator. Just as a counterpoint, I think I was, technically speaking, the most senior product person at Time Inc. Just because there was no one at the VP level, at least no one that I knew of, and I was a senior director, so I was the most senior product person there in a world of old white guys wearing ties. Product clearly would not have been a C-level function there, no matter what you did. Although there were plenty of people throughout the organization that did respect it, it just wasn't at that level.
Great answer, great answer. And the productmentor.com/live, keep the questions coming on in. Back to you, Dan.
Okay. All right, so back to my high production value slides. Um, the hard thing is knowing what to do about this. I think intuitively a lot of this makes sense, or at least it fits with some experiences we've all had. And I did have to correct the spelling on this meme. But what do you do about this? So I think there's a few things, and I've got a few options, and these are things that I've tried, so I can speak to how they went. Option one is really to join a tiny startup as the product guy, right? And there's pros to this. The first one is you get rid of all the level confusion. You're the product guy, so you can be whatever you want. And it is nice to be able to represent yourself as whatever you think is most reflective of the role you're playing. But this is one way to cross the chasm in a very crude sense. You are now the chief product officer of a department of one. You can do whatever you want. You can wear as many hats as you want, and as a startup, you have to wear many hats just to get by. And a lot of those are the right hats. A lot of those are the hats that you want to be wearing as a product guy. You do the user research, you do the prototyping or work with somebody to do it. You do the business analysis. You set the pricing. All of those things are there for the taking because there's unlikely to be somebody else who can do that or will do that. And the other thing is, if the startup does well, and sometimes even if it doesn't, this gives you the ability to jump back and to actually go into either a larger company or just another company at a more senior level than you were, right? I mean, very, very intuitive that you would be able to use this experience to catapult you in a way that spending a year in the same role at another company might not. But I think there's some cons for this. And I've been in and out of startups enough time and at enough different phases in my life. I started when I was 21, and I've got 3 kids now. Startups are things that you have to be really prepared to do. You have to be in the right life place, and you have to understand that your experience doesn't mean nearly as much as what you can do for them right now. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that the startup is fighting to survive. So the notion of being the product guy at a tiny startup means you are the guy who has to solve those problems any way they can be solved, even if it means veering way away from what you value in sort of in your role and in your role as a product guy. Startups also have most, if not all, of the same problems big companies have and more, right? Startups have to budget. Startups have to understand their customers, and they have to market and fight for visibility, right? I mean, big companies have a lot of advantages in that respect. So it's not that going to a startup automatically means you're going to be in TechCrunch. I mean, we all know that's not true. And you toil in obscurity until you don't. So there's a lot of risk that the experience you'll have will simply not be any better or any more helpful than it would have been staying at a larger company. And I think this is the one that maybe people don't think about necessarily ahead of time. If your goal is to learn how to be a product guy, startups won't necessarily teach you that, because most of what startups do is managing a very specific piece of a product and managing the customers and things like that. But being a product guy at a larger company is about managing people, both direct and indirect, and managing crazy groups of stakeholders that want nothing to do with you. And so your qualifications to go back into some other company may be more limited than you think they are by going to a startup. Again, it's not necessarily the wrong decision. It's just something that it's really not for everybody. I think it sounds really attractive, and it is something that if you have the risk tolerance and the opportunity, it's worth looking into. It's not a silver bullet. So that's option one. I think option two is really to find a company that values product management. And this speaks to the notion of, well, how do you find these guys? They are rare. Let's say that. But I think there are a few things you can look for. So one is definitely that if there is executive level product leadership, and these are a few examples, it's a strong indicator that the company values product management. And if this is true at a company larger than 50 to 100 people, that's especially true, right? Those are companies that have grown up and have elevated product to a level where it sits on the executive team. It sits at the same level as the CFO. And all the other functions that are considered essential. I think also having a product-minded founder and CEO is both a strong indicator and to some degree an essential. It's one thing if the company has an installed culture of sort of product people and research and customer focus, and it's a whole other one if the CEO was the product guy, right? Built the company and really has retained all those values and is transferring them to the larger organization. It's invaluable. It's something that you can really make a lot of hay with as a product guy in an organization like that. It's usually paired with a strong tech culture. It's not always, but generally speaking, if you have this kind of focus on product, you have some happy techies who are very pleased by that and who are strong in their own right, because companies don't succeed unless they have a healthy product and tech interplay. And so strong product without strong tech doesn't get you really where you want to go. And the other thing that I've noticed, and I've seen a handful of companies in particular where you can just tell from the way everybody talks, and this is from the finance guys to the customer service people who obviously are more likely to do this. Everybody talks about what's good for the customer. They realize that it's about making money. They realize it's about being an innovative business, and at the same time, they're not looking to take advantage of their customers. They're looking to understand them, right? And they're looking to be able to leverage the relationship that exists. I've noticed this just across companies like Shutterstock, where it's just customer focus is everywhere. And so generally, I think that's one group of ways you can look at to try to find a company that really values this stuff. Why it matters, I think, is a little different, right? And for me, the single biggest advantage is just that it's hard enough being a product guy without having to explain why you're there and having to install a bunch of process that people don't think they need and don't necessarily want. If there's acceptance that product management is a function that matters, it's simply much easier to do your job. It's much easier to go into even very challenging situations and make good results. By definition, there's a career path. If there is exec level product leadership, you, just like that marketing analyst, can see where you might go. And that's really helpful. It doesn't have to be, it's hopeful. It's something where, you may not get there at this organization, but you can understand, well, I can see all the people in the chain above me. What are they good at? What are they doing that's making them successful? And it makes it a lot easier to picture yourself and to really understand where you might end up. And I think the last one is just that in general, product cultures tend to value a lot of the things that product people value. So, there's an emphasis on research, there's an emphasis on discovery of what people want, on iterating on products instead of designing them and then building them without that iteration. So those are all big positives. And so in general, if you can find one of these things, go for it. No situation is perfect. There may be other things that are challenging about any company, but just the notion that it values product management, that there's a role, for you in an organization that goes right to the top, is really hugely beneficial.
And I'm gonna go to Paul, who's got another question.
Going back to your previous slide of being the product guy at a startup, my question, I've found in my experience in startups and people that I've spoken to that often when you're a product guy at a startup, it's usually because the founder, who was the original product guy, has decided to step back a little bit and focus more on growing the company. But then I found that the product guy that they hire is often more of an execution role, executing on the founder's vision more than a true product role. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I would agree with that. I think that it is more likely, and in fact, the one that I can speak to in particular on this was Updater. So I was at Updater for a little bit less than a year, and the role that I came into was as the product guy to take over from the founder, who was the original visionary. And it was fascinating because, it was execution and, and essentially, he wanted help transferring his business vision, which was actually, his background was as a corporate lawyer. So, his business vision was very much, I want to make all these deals and I want to put this product in front of people that fulfills sort of the grand vision of putting all of these really interesting deals together that would help customers. So he was thinking about customers. He did have a really good vision in place for how he wanted to get there, but his strength was the deal side. And so he wanted somebody who really understood what his vision was, but then also just was more experienced with building product, with actually working with tech guys and working with customers directly. And so it actually was kind of symbiotic. Like it worked in the sense that you know, if he had been a pure product guy, I think we would have butted heads 100% all the time. You know, and as it was more that, you know, we butted heads over the details of execution, which I was managing. You know, it was like the vision part. You know, he was willing to sort of give me what I needed, and then I could go with it. But you know, it's a very good point that in general, you know, that sort of situation is fraught, especially if you want to come in as a higher level guy. If you're a lower level guy, going and being the product manager and taking direction from a really strong founder CEO can be great. You know, you just have to be prepared to grow that way.
Right. Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Great, great. And everyone, just keep your questions coming in, theproductmentor.com/live, and we will keep passing them on to Dan. Back to you, Dan.
Okay. So let's say that you've exhausted your options. So you don't want to do a startup for whatever reason, and finding a company that fits the unicorn definition is challenging. What can you do? You know, how can you make the most of your current job or find something new that has potential to grow? And I think there's a bunch of things you can do. So, you know, I've thrown a few ideas out here. This speaks, I think, to that first question. You know, how do you know what your company or the ones you're looking at mean when they say product management? You know, I think the range of responsibilities I've seen is really, really large. And you know, I'll say that on the media companies, I think, are the ones that maybe are the most wide-ranging, because there are always editorial voices, and that in particular is a very interesting dynamic when editorial and product either work together or when one reports to the other. It produces very interesting dynamics because editors, by definition, you know, are either curating or defining the product by what the content is, and product folks are usually defining it by the frameworks and the containers and the you know, partnerships and the features of the website. And so the notion of who holds more power in those dynamics, either editorial or business, or if there is a product organization that lives there, those are all really important questions to ask. And I think, you know, it helps you illuminate what the product role would really be at a company like that. You know, Google is the classic example people hear about, and I haven't worked there, but I certainly, you know, have heard things about how, you know, engineers have all the power and product managers, you know, sometimes you hear that they're just sort of doing the engineer's bidding, whereas other times you hear, oh no, they're doing really interesting work. It's stuff the engineers don't want to do, but you know, they have a lot of power on their own. And so I think knowing whether the engineers or the product or the finance people, you know, whoever it is, knowing who's ascendant will tell you what that role really is. And I think on the startup side, it's actually a lot about identity. It's about who are the founders, you know, literally who are they as people, what do they value? You know, what are they product guys? Are they people with a great idea who cut some really great deals? Are they industrial designers if they're building physical product? You know, that'll tell you a lot about what the product role would be, because you know, a founder who is, who's fundamentally maybe an investment banker is going to think about product and think about technology, for that matter, differently than somebody who came up as an engineer. So I think those are the ways that I've used successfully so far to really figure out what the role is, and then you have to decide whether it's right for you. So the next thing you can do, and this is where the lane change kind of comes up, you can consider what your options are. There's a lot of different things product managers can do, right? And we have, our jobs are big jobs, and there's pieces of all sorts of different functions that could be full-time jobs that we do part-time. So are any of these so exciting that they make you want to focus on only that one facet of the job? That's almost what happened to me when I went into corp dev. I was really excited by the strategy. I was really excited by the notion of, again, how the companies fit together and how you could grow inorganically. So looking at corp dev was the right move for me, and I had an opportunity and I took it. Are you an analytics guy, which I had been in the past? Research or data science, these are all places where you can focus on that. And if you're really, really good at maybe one of the core product functions, which I would define as stakeholder management, you may be better off as a program manager. All things that I think are valid choices for people who are in product and either feel like they can't grow or feel like there's parts of the job that they don't like, or in general need to adapt their role to what their company's asking of them. And I think the bottom line really is product the right role for you? And it could be either in general or at this company. It's not necessarily the same answer. And if you stay where you are you going to grow either just by virtue of being there or because someone's helping you grow? If the answer is maybe not, that's when I think you need to start thinking, well, what are my other options? Step 3. So this one is where I've found myself a few times in the lane change process. It may sound really fun to do something different, but especially for those of us who really love product, that may be the only role that works. It may be the only thing that actually strikes the right balance. But I think you can ask yourself some questions that help illuminate that. Would you be happy with less? Would you actually be happy with a smaller role that was more focused, and for that matter, that maybe has more of a career path? That's totally an option, and there's a lot of roles like that. What is the best use of the skills you have? Are you stretching yourself unnaturally to be a product guy? Are the skills that you have more attuned to a different role? And then this is really tough to articulate, so I hope I said it well here. But do you love the situation you're in well enough that the career path thing isn't a problem? There's plenty of people for whom that's true. I saw this a lot actually at ESPN. ESPN is the sort of company where people are lifers, like they love it, and it's because it's sports, it's because they love their coworkers, it's because it's super interesting work, and at the same time, just relative to what at least I saw happening in the open market, it takes a long time to advance up the ladder. That may or may not be a problem, but if it doesn't matter to you that you advance up the ladder quickly, if what you value is a great workplace and stability, it can be the right choice to stay in a career path that is longer and less certain. So, all things that require real thought.
So I have a question that just came in from the audience, and again, from an anonymous individual. Folks, feel free to use your name. It's easier to refer to you. And Anonymous asks, when making a lateral shift as a senior product manager into a different domain, how do you make up for the lack of experience in that industry?
Well, that's interesting. And actually, Jay and I have talked about this a fair bit in our mentorship. I don't think you always need a common thread, but it definitely helps. I think making a complete shift where there's really nothing tying you together except for the fact that you're a product manager, that requires you and your hiring manager, for that matter, to really take a leap of faith and to say, A, yes, you can learn this domain, as quickly as somebody who's, been here for years, and B, that your particular product management skills and approach translate to that new domain. It's easier if you come in with some kind of transferable skill, and for me, I went from people to Shutterstock in part because Shutterstock's editorial business is focused on entertainment. It made a lot of sense for, I'd just been in the entertainment world, I understood how it operated. It made a lot of sense for me to come over and help in this new domain where I don't know anything about licensing. I don't know anything about photography and footage licensing, but I knew a lot about the customers who were going to buy this stuff. And so it's I know that's an impartial or an incomplete answer. I'm not sure what you can do if it's not something where you just have an intuitive and sort of a very strong sense with the hiring manager, yeah, this can work. My skills are transferable. I can see the common thread, because I think that's what really makes people feel confident.
Yeah, good points. And again, keep the questions coming in through the productmentor.com/live. Back to you.
Okay, so I think the next thing that's important to think about is really finding ways to grow, and it's not the same thing as learning new skills. I think the hard part, in particular, about the senior product manager role is you always think that I should be learning new skills so I'm more valuable. I should be finding the next thing that my company wants to do and doing it before they think about it. And surprising people with how awesome I am at that. That isn't necessarily going to get you to the next level. It may, but it's not a sure thing. And I think the things that really do get you to the next level are the things that, frankly, are hardest to come by as a product manager inside a company. You need to manage people. Some of the best advice I ever got was literally for somebody just to tell me, hey, you need to find somebody to manage. It's important. It didn't tell me why. Just said people management is important, and you need to get good at it. And that was actually also at ESPN. So I ended up managing 2 developers and 2 product managers. And then I moved to Viacom and had a team of, I think, 8 with a bunch of offshore guys. And it was hugely valuable because it taught me product. And it's not an opportunity that comes to you. It's something that you do have to seek out. And frankly, that's not always going to be available. So it's something that if you have it, it's really helpful to take. I think also just prioritizing an understanding of your whole business and the market, not just your product, that may or may not also help you advance, but it certainly helps you have more perspective on what your company and in general what the market that you're in really needs. And for that matter, then if you end up in a position where you can contribute on the strategy side, you'll be far better empowered than if you had just been focusing 100% on your product and your immediate customers. And then third, just networking in general, which obviously is one of the reasons we're all here. It's hugely valuable. I've gotten maybe a collateral benefit to the number of jobs I've had, which is just that I know a lot of people in a lot of different places. And it can be very hard to do that if you're either not in an outward-facing role or if you haven't had sort of enough exposure to enough different populations. So it's something you really have to try hard to develop.
So I'm going to go to Dustin, who has the next question.
So you mentioned looking at the relative power of the engineering function as an indicator of the ability for product management to progress in a company. Curious on your view on the sales function and the relative power of a sales team and how that might influence product management within a company.
No, that's a great question. So I've worked for a number of very strong sales cultures. And these are such that the good thing is that they're hungry to put new things in front of people, right? And I think they're not typically people who are going to ask you to spend a year on a spec. They're people who are going to say, no, I just want to see what it is because I got to sell it and it's got to be sold 3 months before it's ready. So sure, show me the wireframes, right? They'll push really hard to accelerate a process that frankly most of us on the product side are less comfortable accelerating. But so I think I would think it does correlate positively in that you can have a sales team that wants new product and is unwilling to tolerate a product function. That I've also definitely seen where they don't want somebody telling them no, they just want somebody building features one-off and putting stuff out there for them to make money on. But I think if you have enough interplay, you can have a really strong product function that works with the sales guys because the sales guys fundamentally they're aligned. Their interests are the same. They want new stuff to roll out and they don't want to wait for it.
Great. Yeah, and so everyone else, just keep the questions coming in. theproductmentor.com/live, and I'll keep passing them along. And Dan, back to you.
All right, so I think the next thing, and this is after you've done a lot of soul searching, the next thing is really to know when to go. And I'll admit that this is not something I've been great at historically, but I think I've learned something through some of my moves. It's easy, and again, this is again part of the lateral move thing. It's pretty easy to find something new, but deciding whether to take it is challenging, and for that matter, deciding how to handle it. When you want to think about it, when you want to socialize it with your current role, all very difficult things. And I have no silver bullets here, but the main thing that I think you need to do is ask yourself, have you actually given your current role enough of a shot? Are you going to regret not having asked for the thing that you're about to jump ship and take, from your current situation? Because if you love it, in general, and it's just that you feel stuck, you feel like no one's helping you, ask for the help. It's hard, but that's the main thing that I've been guilty of is thinking the grass was greener and believing that the situation I was in was simply not one that could grow. I may or may not have been right about that. I mean, I've had enough hindsight now to be unsure about a couple of things, whereas in a couple of other cases I was totally right to go. And it's something that is very hard to judge. And I think the last bit is, is what you're going to do enough of a step up to be worth leaving? Because I think a lot of us undervalue how nice it is to be at a place where everyone knows your name, and to be at a place where they trust you for, to do the function that you currently do. Changing to a different function can be tough, but, the people and the relationships that you have at a job are incredibly valuable and are things that you have to rebuild going anywhere else. And above all, just it's never worth burning a bridge. It really isn't. And even if you toy with going, don't be afraid to stay. Like, don't be afraid to say no if the role that you're being offered, it feels a little better. It feels like it'd be really exciting, but staying is something that you can get your head around. Don't be afraid to stay. It's advice that I wish I'd thought about more, before making a couple of the moves that I've made. And at the same time, and this really is, I think, the last bit, you can always go back. And I don't mean specifically to a company, but in terms of trying a new different type of role, or trying a company in a different market, you don't know these things unless you do them. You don't know how they're going to work, and you don't know the real character of them until you've lived it. And in particular, if you change lanes, if you actually end up in a different discipline, like a corp dev or engineering management or something like that, you can always come back to product, because product is the one place where those experiences make you better. I think there's other cases where it would sort of be seen as a real departure. It'd be something that would weaken your case. I think with product management, we're all very fortunate that that's not true. I think it almost always makes you stronger. So I just have one more sort of substantive diversion, and then we can wrap up. I don't have an MBA, and I've thought about it, but every time I've thought about it, it's never made sense to me to not just get a better job. Is this the way that I would put it? If your current job's not teaching you what you want or not helping you advance, it's worth trying, to find another company who will help you grow. But I will say that there's people who will always wonder if they don't do it, and there's a bunch of different ways to do it. Obviously, there's executives, there's people who take time off, there's people who do it at night, and I worked with a guy who was just a fantastic product GM type, also a bit of a tech guy, a visionary, who always felt like he was missing something for not having an MBA. And this was a guy who was at the senior levels of a multinational corporation. Like, you would look at him from the outside and think that he had it all figured out. And he always thought, there are things that I don't understand that people with MBAs do. So that exists too. But for me, I think the reason to do an MBA would be because you just can't logically see how you would grow organically. And again, at a given role, that totally is a problem. It's a problem that we have. But there's always somewhere else that you can go. And the main other thing that I've certainly seen with people that I've worked with, your current company they're not the ones who are going to appreciate that you have an MBA. Maybe it happens sometimes where somebody sends you to school and then gives you a job that's 3 rungs up and transfers you to a new exciting part of the business. But in general, they're not the ones who are agitating for you to get these skills. The skills are for you, and they would prefer that you learn them on the job and advanced organically, assuming they give you that opportunity. So I think the bottom line is that there's conditions where it makes sense, but you are giving up. I don't know what it is. It's not necessarily 3 or 4 years, but you're giving up some amount of time that could be spent on the job and learning things in a practical, real-world place. The one thing I will say, just as a caveat, is I have a friend who went to INSEAD outside of Paris, 13 months, pure party. He met his wife there, absolutely loved it. I don't think he'd change a thing. So there definitely are MBAs that work.
We've got a question from Ian. Ian?
Yeah, hi. I had a question, which was, are there other education options that you recommend for product managers? I've seen, when I was at the Associated Press, I had an HR manager who did one of the MBA weekends at Harvard. That was sort of an intensive, maybe it was a weekend, maybe it was a full week actually. But yeah. And I know there's general assemblies about product management. I saw a strategy on a strategy seminar on the West Coast recently. Have you seen any success with some of these sort of condensed education options?
You know, I've had friends who've done the executives, whatever it is, a couple weekends a quarter, that sort of thing. And actually, the people that did the best with it were the people who were already fairly accomplished, right? They weren't doing it to try to level up in the kinds of jobs they could get. They honestly wanted to network. They were just there because they wanted to, which was probably going to be something they started themselves. And got their MBAs pretty quickly out of school. For those guys, doesn't do much. So I think there's kind of a critical period where if you want to go start something, if you want to completely change, your either your life or your situation, you want to move somewhere, you want to sort of forget what your current job is and get a totally different one, then it can work to do it at that slightly less senior level. And then at the senior level, it is almost purely for networking and just for kind of burnishing some of their skills and their thinking. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, thinking just a little more like on the incremental tactical level, I think my company offers like a $2,000 education stipend. I've been starting to look around at what sort of options exist for more just like 1 day or 2 day options.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that I did find value in was a product marketing seminar, because especially if you come out of the tech side, it's just not. It's not something that you instinctively think about. Like there's, the aspects of packaging and pricing and sort of all the things that don't come naturally to people who are just used to building stuff. I did find that helpful, and I've had other people take courses like that and like them. I haven't looked at the GA stuff that would sort of be for people who are already product managers. I've seen a lot of people come out of the UX courses and the stuff that's like product management crammed into 12 weeks. And in those cases, yeah, maybe it does give you a jump start, but I think it's not really a substitute for the job.
Very cool. Thanks.
If I could maybe chime in on that question, this is Paul. I've done the pragmatic marketing product manager certification program, and I've actually found that that's opened a bunch of doors in terms of getting interviews and whatnot. They say, oh, you've got pragmatic. And they see that there are a few others like the 280 group, AI PMM. I've also seen a bunch of product managers who were able to advance because they got their PMP.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm seeing more PMP out there on LinkedIn's and resumes. Yeah, it's interesting. And the pragmatic marketing course actually is the one that I took, so I should probably put that on my resume. But yeah, actually, and yeah, Marty Kagan. So I will say that I had Marty Kagan come in or it was actually my boss at the time brought him in to one of the companies I was at, and it was a fantastic experience. And so having that kind of internal learning, I think, is super valuable because then you also get to practice it with your team. Whereas if you then go and do it, on your own and then bring it back to your company, they may just say, well, what's the big deal? Like why should I listen to this? Whereas if you pay the money to bring in Marty Kagan, they're already kind of invested.
Great. So we have some more questions from the viewing audience. And so first person is asking, what skills or responsibilities do you think are most important in order for a senior product manager to be eligible for the next step, whatever the step may be? I think you might have touched on this before, but maybe you could perhaps elaborate a little bit.
No, sure. I mean, I think the hardest thing is actually people management. I mean, I think that's almost the number one thing where and it's not even that you wouldn't get a job like a group PM without people management, but you probably wouldn't be very good at it, right? You're going to be, a senior product manager who is, proved themselves at a lower level, and now you're a group PM and you have no idea how to manage people and you screw up. And you either end up back at the same level or you just don't go any further than that. So, to me, people management is the number one. And I think high-level stakeholder management is really the other one. It's actually stopping. It's seeing yourself as a peer to these guys who are way above your pay grade and who are, very, essentially at the executive level, but really seeing yourself as a peer to them for the projects and the tasks that you're doing. I think it's easier to do that as you get up the level, but it's a big shift, especially if you've been a regular product manager, senior product manager at the same company. You know, they have to see you differently, and proving that is very challenging.
Cool. And the next question I've got is from someone named Nate, and Nate is asking, do you have any books or blogs you recommend following for someone on the other end of the spectrum new to product management?
Sure. I mean, my favorite is definitely Marty Kagan's stuff. So that's svpg.com, their whole blog, and it's really interesting how he distills the stuff that he'll do in his workshops on the blog, because he'll write these little bite-sized articles about a certain term that maybe the world is kind of misusing. He'll talk about product principles and product vision and sort of say, hey, well, everybody thinks it's this, but it's actually this. Really interesting. So I follow that more than anything else. I do kind of like the Cranky Product Manager, but I guess that's probably a little bit more. I mean, she doesn't update as much as she used to.
No, she's great. She's great. And next question goes to Dustin.
Just to follow up a little bit on the MBA and professional training discussion, if you think back right to that point in time where you first made a switch from engineering to product, is there a specific type of training, MBA or other, that would have been really valuable right at that point in time when you made that first jump?
Yeah, the thing that was nice about ESPN in particular was that they actually also were sort of weak on the product management side in terms of organization. Like we all reported straight to the GM. But there was a real understanding of, oh, well, the product managers are the ones who figure out what this should be, and they watch the numbers and they help us understand the customers. It was a very intuitive thing for them. I mean, I think for me, like the stuff I really had to learn on the job that I'd never done before was analytics and and generally sort of approach to customer segments, things like that. So and to the point about an MBA maybe being a part of that education, just understanding business decisions without having to sort of watch them go by and then analyze them after the fact. It all would have been helpful. I didn't feel like I needed to take a year off to figure it out, but having some basic primer would have been really good.
Awesome. Yeah, and so let me hand it back to you, Dan, to do your I guess your closing and wrap up.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, and these are very brief. I think really the things that make the most difference to your life at a company and in general to your advancement are your boss and the company culture. I think I've had some really great bosses. Not generally. I mean, a couple were product people and a couple really weren't. But people who helped me understand that in general, personal development was not the same thing as adding skills and just trying to level up based on being a sort of a top producer. It's more about understanding people, understanding how relationships work, and for that matter, really, I mean, relationships. I could talk another hour on just the notion of how important it is to have real relationships that aren't just purely transactional. Not things that are based on what, do I need an excuse to talk to you? No, I shouldn't need an excuse to talk to you. We're building a relationship, and then when we need each other, we'll be there. So that whole dynamic is something that I think I wouldn't have picked up without having a good boss, at various points along the way, and also that if the culture that you're around, supports you in the important ways and really just generally accepts what you're there to do. So much, I mean, product is hard, but so many things are easier when you're truly accepted for what you're doing. And the last bit, pretty cheesy, but learning is important. I think learning is the thing that's most important of no matter what you decide to do. And if you ever find yourself not learning, well, that's a good sort of reason to think about changing lanes. But for me, I've been fortunate in that generally speaking, I've always been doing new things, and and perhaps I get bored a little too easily, but I've never really gotten that bored. So it's been a fun journey.
Outstanding. Something you don't want to say in an interview is I might get bored too easily. But excellent, Dan. This was a great presentation, especially for those senior people or people maybe approaching that chasm. Yeah, Dan Mason, product owner of editorial at Shutterstock. Really great discussion of what it's like being a senior product manager and how to kind of get to those next steps. Whoa, look at that. We just had a whole bunch of questions just fly on in. Before I finish wrapping up, let me throw these questions over to you, Dan, and we'll
Sure.
do some quick last-minute questions because some of them look like they might be good, even though I shrunk the font on my monitor a little prematurely. So the first question is, let's see, what do you recommend for product individuals who have not come from a technical background?
That's a great question. So I've had people work for me on both sides, and I think if you're not technical, the number one thing you can invest in is, it's kind of customer service almost. It's like if you're technical, you're going to have an easier time generally working with the rhythms of development. People are going to instinctively say, oh, well, you were an engineer, maybe you sort of understand this. And granted, that goes away the longer you're away from engineering, but if you're coming fresh out of it, it's a big benefit. But if you can come into it saying, hey, I know what this customer wants, I've been living it, I know exactly how they operate, I help them with their problems, that can be a really, really helpful thing to start with. And it depends on the culture, it depends on your boss. Your boss is going to value different things. But one way to start actually is analytics. If you really deeply understand what the product is doing, you can be, I think, much more helpful than average, as a new product manager in helping people really understand that customer.
And a follow-up question I think they asked was, do you think a lack of technical skills will impact you at a senior level?
I don't think so. And I have had people ask me, like, yeah, should I go back to GA and take a technical course just so that I can, yeah, I'm with you, Jeremy. But if people think that they should go and take a course to learn how to code, it's like, no, please don't do that. You're just going to confuse things. I think it's a great skill for life, but it's not something that really helps you get credibility with your developers. I think that credibility comes from understanding what they're up against, understanding that when they tell you something, they're usually not, BSing you, and that there are trade-offs you can help them make to move the process along. They may not instinctively find the same trade-offs that you will, but you can help them do that.
Yep, and the next question comes from Vikas.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, in your experience, you changed a lot of jobs and moved around quite a bit. From a networking perspective, what seemed to work, what didn't work, and what your experience has been, and what advice you can give to folks who are wanting to get most networking done in the least amount of time.
Yeah, well, so for me, the times when I did the most networking were moves, right? So I moved from Boston to New York, and then New York to San Francisco, and then San Francisco back to New York. So each time I did that, I had to heavily invest in meeting people around town, and to some degree then in reactivating a network I had in New York when I came back. So in those moves, I was able to draw on some pretty disparate populations of people that I had known. It was a huge benefit. But when I went to California, I spent a long time going down to the Valley and doing those networking events. I didn't find my job through that. I found that actually through a recruiter on the East Coast. But I got to know a lot of people who I still keep up with. And likewise in New York, especially when I was young and single, I went to everything. And so I think my network is mostly people that I've worked with, but there's a good chunk of those people that I just intersected with at events. And I'm fortunate now in that we have there are reunion groups for a lot of the companies that I've worked with, and I do the best I can to go to all of them, even though it's a pain, but just to keep that stuff fresh. But there are certainly companies where there just isn't that kind of alumni network, and you have to do it for yourself.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Dan. And also, as always, the presentation is going to be posted to our SlideShare channel. And a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, and everyone else who joined us in the room, all the mentors you see in the room today, and all the people who joined us online, many of which remain anonymous to this day. And also, don't forget, if you're interested in being a product mentor like Dan and product people and working with other kind of product people of all sorts, visit theproductmentor.com. Sign up today. Our next session starts soon. If you end up missing that cutoff, no sweat. We always have another session right around the corner. We can always use a lot more mentors for the program. So you just go to theproductmentor.com and click sign up, and that's all there is to that. And also, if you're looking for a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own, and it's free for everybody, job board at theproductjobs.com. And with all that said, I'll see you guys all next time. Bye.